Here are 3 true scary stories from Reddit. The links to the stories are in the description below. Enjoy. Number 1. This happened when I was a kid, I think when I was around 9 or 10. I lived in a little cookie-cutter house in the middle of a cul-de-sac for the greater part of my childhood. I'd like to think I was fearless. I'd leave home for hours, unattended, and venture across my small desert town to meet new friends and explore locations that were typically off-limits to kids. Thinking back on it now, I was most likely getting away from my family. My family was terrible. I could write post after post about being raised by narcissistic parents alone. They were and still are so wrapped up in themselves that neglect was and still is part of my everyday life. It was easy for me to slip away from their craziness during the day, but this also meant things like keeping me safe and comfortable simply weren't among their top priorities. For example, my window. My room was in the front of the house by the driveway. I don't know how it happened, but one day my blinds fell off the window or something. They were just gone and I had no curtains either. This meant that every dramatic plot twist of Barbie and Friends, every solo karaoke session I had, every booger picked, bedtime prayers, and Goosebumps books that were read were all on display for neighbors to watch. And my actions seemed to have attracted the attention of one neighbor in particular. I had this thing, this repulsion of beds when I was little. I don't know how to explain it, but basically I slept all over the room except in my bed. I remember this particular night, I fell asleep in an old recliner that sat in the corner of my room. I don't remember what woke me up, but my eyes were drawn to the window, and there was a man there. He was standing on the window ledge, his upper half bent to the side so as to fit his whole body in the rectangular shape of the window. He wore some kind of ski mask and he just stood there, staring at me, and I stared back. I'm still unsure if he actually knew that I was awake. The only thing that I had moved were my eyelids. I then shut my eyes tight and pretended to still be asleep. I was hoping that faking sleep would get him to go away. Plus, I was in my panties. I didn't want some strange man looking at me in my panties as I ran out of my room. So I stayed in my busted old recliner and hoped he'd be gone when I opened my eyes again. But he was still there. Now, he was sitting on the ledge, head tilted to the side as his body had been only a moment earlier. He sat very still. I was still too. I didn't want him to know that I had noticed him, so I tried faking sleep again. Nope, he was still there. Still watching. Still waiting for me to react. I had no choice. I finally worked up the courage to uncurl myself from the recliner. Frightened and embarrassed as I was, I left my room as nonchalantly as possible, as if I were just taking a stroll to use the potty or something, and I didn't go back. Though, in hindsight, he was probably gone the second my door clicked shut behind me. The entire ordeal left me with a fear of being around windows at night that persists to this day, even though I'm an adult and live on the top floor of my apartment building. So, I figured my story would be creepy enough to share with you all. Thanks for listening. Number 2. This took place when I was probably around 4 or 5 years old. We lived in a tiny town in North Carolina. Combined with the city and entire county, we had a population of around 5,000 people. My parents and I lived 10 minutes from town. The closest neighbors were our extended family, and they lived an acre away in each direction. We knew everyone, and everyone knew us. When I was young, I had a fear of leaving my curtains open at night. I had to have the windows covered before I could even sleep. I was too young to verbalize it at the time, but the concept of me waking up with someone looking through my windows terrified me. After this incident, this particular fear of mine has amplified. If anyone entered our property, we knew who they were. So when my father and older brother started finding boot prints on the property that didn't belong to them, we got a little nervous. Living as far out as we did meant that the police, fire department, and EMS would take much longer to arrive if a bad situation arose. My father had taught my brother, sister, and I on how to handle guns, even from an early age. At 6, I was fairly proficient with my Daisy BB gun. Over the course of the next several days, my brother and father started noticing more boot tracks and that things were being moved around in the barn. They couldn't tell if anything was missing, but it was apparent that someone had been snooping around at night. Since I was so young, my parents didn't mention anything about this as to not to frighten me. But my brother did. He told me that someone was creeping around the yard at night, and one day I would wake up and he'd be in the house looking over me. To put it lightly, my brother was an asshole. My brother always made fun of the fact that I wouldn't sleep until the curtains were closed. He told me that I needed to face my fears and convinced me to sleep with my curtains drawn back. I craved his approval more than anything, so this time I agreed. So that night, I left my curtains drawn. It took a long time for me to get to sleep, but eventually it did come. I was always a very light sleeper, and even the slightest gust of wind would awaken me. I'd always wake up at least 4 or 5 times a night. That night, I heard the porch just outside my window creaking. I tried to ignore it, thinking that it had to be my imagination. Then a shadow passed over the light coming from the lamp outside. I opened my eyes and sat up. A man was standing in the window, hands cupped up to the glass. In the process of running out of my room, I pissed myself. I ran straight for my parents' bedroom as the doorknob on the front door started jiggling hard. He was trying to get in. I ran into their bedroom and told my parents what was happening. My dad grabbed a gun and flashlight, threw the door open, and headed outside. My mother immediately locked it behind him before waking up my brother. After nearly half an hour, my father came back in. His face was sweaty and pale. He told my brother and I to go to bed. We did, but we stayed up and listened. My father had told our mother that he found a tarp and blanket set up a half a mile into the woods, just off the logging trail. It seemed to him that the man had been there a while. Dad apparently tore the place apart. He had sight of the guy, but lost him in the end. The police came and took statements from my parents and also had a look in the woods, but didn't find anything. They figured he wouldn't be back anytime soon. We never saw him again, and I always sleep with my windows covered. So, creepy ass man spying on a 4-year-old. Let's not meet. Number 3. When I was in my second year of college, I lived alone. It was in a downstairs flat with my bedroom facing towards the street. I had some heavy green curtains over the windows, so I didn't mind too much. I had a group of friends that lived about 15 minutes away, and most days I would hang out over there until about 3 or 4 in the morning. Sometimes I just ended up sleeping over. I also had a long-distance boyfriend at the time. If I wasn't out with my friends, I'd be at home, up late, sex Skyping with him. This incident happened to me in the fall. Halloween rolled around and I was out most of the evening hanging with that group of friends. I decided to call it a night before it got too late and headed back to my flat. I was dressed as sexy Supergirl and was gonna do some sex Skyping with my boyfriend. We had really got into the role playing and we were having a great time. I made sure the curtains were closed and the lights were off. You know, just to be safe. One time, during a previous Skyping session, a drunk man had tried to get in. I'd fallen asleep and left the curtains wide open. I awoke to the sounds of someone trying to push open the front door. When I looked up, there was a man just staring at me through the window. I freaked out and spent the rest of the night in the living room. So, as I said, my boyfriend and I were Skyping. The lights were off and the curtains shut. Then I noticed a kind of flickering in my peripheral and looked around. The curtains, although closed at the bottom, were slightly parted near the top. I covered myself and got up to investigate. I looked through the gap in the curtains and froze. There was a man in front of the window. He was hunched over and panting, exposed at the waist, violently stroking his member. I tried to quickly rearrange the curtains, then grabbing my laptop, I hid in the living room. I heard what sounded like someone running away. A few days later, there was a pink envelope waiting for me when I walked through the door. As I picked it up, various denominations of change fell to the floor. Written on the lip of the envelope was a message in jagged capital letters. It read, "I mean you no harm. XXX." Shorthand for kisses. A horrible feeling of dread spread over me. Then the dread was coupled with shock. I had never felt anything like it. I turned the card over, and there, in the same handwriting, was the message, "To the girl in the front room." Opening it, I saw that it was a quite traditional sort of card, cream with a delicate watercolor bouquet on the front, with the sentence, "Thinking of you," in gold curvature next to it. The inside was completely covered with a message. Some of the letters were capitalized, some were backwards, and words were misspelled. I called my friends, then got the police to come over. Basically, they couldn't really do anything and took the card as evidence. I can't recite the whole passage verbatim, but the essence of it was, "I'm an old man who has lived on the street for a long time. You made me the happiest I've ever been in my life on that Halloween. I'm sorry I scared you. You are very beautiful. I love to watch you, whether you're working on your computer or touching yourself. Please leave your curtains open just a little bit for me. For each time you do this, I will post a couple of pounds through the letterbox. Signed, Ken, XXXXX." The police gave me a case number and said they'd get a patrol car to drive past my house every so often. I stayed at my friend's for a week and had one of them stay over at mine after that. That wasn't quite the last of Ken. Sometimes there would be a knocking at my window, but I kept my curtains 100% closed and didn't open them. 3 or 4 months went by without incident, and by then snow had fallen. Then one day, I was leaving my house and saw a set of footprints left by someone pacing around the front window. Shortly after, I had moved. I contacted a friend that had a job where she could check the local electoral register. We found a person by the name of K. Mordew who lived on my previous street. Over the next 2 years, I'd walk past my old house on my way home. Then came the day where I saw that someone had completely covered the inside windows with newspaper. It seemed like someone else was having trouble with Ken still coming around. So, let's not meet again, Ken. Okay? Well, I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time.